I never imagined I'd become a widow at 34. But here I am, sitting at my kitchen table at 7 a.m., trying to get my 7-year-old son ready for school, all while fighting back tears. It's been 8 months since the construction site accident took Mark from us, but some days it feels like it happened yesterday. The first few months after Mark's death were a blur. Paperwork, tears, sleepless nights. I honestly don't know how I managed to survive it all without Sarah and Jim, my in-laws. They've been absolute angels. They've been picking up Tommy from school every day so I can focus on work. I swing by their place afterward to pick him up, and every single time, they tried to give me money. "Sarah, I can't take this," I said last week, pushing the envelope she tried to slip into my purse. "Dakota, sweetie, we want to help," she insisted, her kind eyes meeting mine. "We know the insurance company paid well, but let us do this." She was right. The insurance company did pay out $300,000 after Mark's death. Between that and my job as a marketing manager, we're doing okay financially. But it's not about the money with Sarah and Jim. It's about the love and support they show us every day. If only my own parents could be as supportive. My parents have always made it clear that my older sister Rachel was their golden child, and now they extend that same favoritism to her kids over Tommy. Last weekend was a prime example. Tommy was excited to see his grandparents, but within 20 minutes my mom was complaining about his questions. "Why does the clock make that sound?" Tommy asked, pointing to their antique grandfather clock. "How does it work inside? Dakota, can't you control him?" Mom sighed, rolling her eyes. "He's always asking questions about everything. Rachel's kids never give us this much trouble." Dad nodded in agreement, reaching for his laptop. "Here, Tommy, why don't you play some games instead?" I downloaded some new ones. But Tommy didn't want to play games. He wanted to talk, to learn, to connect. Meanwhile, Rachel's 3 kids sat in the corner, absorbed in their phones, barely acknowledging anyone, and my parents held this up as the ideal behavior. I've learned to bite my tongue. Growing up as the less favored child, I got used to these comparisons long ago. Now, I just shake my head and stay silent when they praise Rachel's parenting while criticizing mine. At least they help occasionally with Tommy, watching him when I have late meetings or picking him up if Sarah and Jim are busy. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday dinner at my parents' house. The warning signs were there from the moment I walked in. Mom had made my favorite lasagna, which she usually only does when she wants something. Dad was unusually chatty, asking about work, about Tommy, about everything really. They were building up to something, and I just didn't know what. "So, Dakota," Mom said carefully, cutting her lasagna into perfect squares, "we've been meaning to ask you something. How much was Mark's life insurance payout?" The question hit me like a slap in the face. I nearly choked on my water, completely blindsided by such a direct inquiry about something so personal. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe I was just tired of keeping secrets from my parents. But I answered honestly. "About $300,000, I said quietly. The fork in Mom's hand clattered against her plate. Dad's head snapped up so fast I thought he might hurt himself. They stared at me like I had just announced I'd won the lottery. "Well," Mom said, putting down her fork deliberately, "what are you planning to do with all that money?" I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. "I've invested it," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's for Tommy's future, his college education, maybe help him buy an apartment when he's older. Mark and I always talked about it." "But that's years away," Dad interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "You should be thinking about the present, Dakota. About yourself and your family." The way he said family made it clear he wasn't talking about Tommy. I knew that tone. It was the same one they used when they helped Rachel with her down payment on her house or funded her lavish wedding. "You could do so much with that money now," Mom chimed in, leaning forward eagerly. "You could help your family, people who need it today, not save it all for some distant future that might not even come." "I'm not discussing my money anymore," I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. The silence that followed was deafening. They both sat back, Dad's face clouding over with that familiar disappointment I'd seen so many times growing up. Mom pressed her lips together in that thin line that always meant trouble. The rest of the dinner passed in intense silence, broken only by the scraping of forks against plates. I thought that would be the end of it. Knowing my parents, I expected them to give me the silent treatment for at least a month. That's what they always did when I didn't live up to their expectations. But to my surprise, Mom called just a week later. "We're having a family dinner on Sunday," she announced, her voice warm as if nothing had happened. "Rachel and the kids will be there too. You have to come, sweetie." Something about her tone made me uneasy, but I agreed. When I arrived that Sunday, Rachel was already there with her 3 kids, all of them glued to their phones as usual. As we sat down to eat, she started talking about rising prices, bills piling up, and how hard it was to make ends meet these days. "Everything is just so expensive now," she sighed, passing the potatoes. "Your father and I barely have enough for a normal life anymore." As Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, talking about rising grocery prices and utility bills, Rachel cleared her throat and sat up straighter. "I've been thinking," she announced, looking around the table with that same self-righteous expression she'd worn since we were kids. "Dakota and I should help Mom and Dad financially. I'll send them $500 every month. I wish I could do more, but you know how it is. Jack's the only one working, and with 3 kids?" She trailed off, letting that sink in before turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you, Dakota, you should send them $1,000 monthly." "Excuse me?" I nearly choked on my water. "Well, it makes sense," Rachel pressed on. "You earn really well at your job, and you only have 1 child to support. Plus, with your situation, you have other income now." My blood boiled at her careful avoidance of mentioning Mark's death directly. I wanted to scream that I was a widow, that I didn't have a husband's income to rely on anymore, that the other income she was referring to was meant for my son's future. But Mom was already clapping her hands in delight, and Dad was beaming like it was Christmas morning. "Oh, girls," Mom exclaimed. "You don't know what this means to us." I sat there, torn between anger and disbelief, watching my family's expectant faces. The words of refusal died in my throat. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, and here they were, putting a price tag on it. "Fine," I heard myself say. "I'll do it." The first transfer hurt the most, $1,000 gone with a few clicks. I told myself it was worth it if it meant more family support with Tommy, but that fantasy quickly unraveled. "Mom, could you pick Tommy up from school today? Sarah has a doctor's appointment and I have a late meeting." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." Mom's voice crackled through the phone. "I've got such a headache today. You know how my migraines get." This became a pattern. Every time I needed help with Tommy, there was an excuse. Mom was too busy, too tired, or had errands to run. Meanwhile, the $1,000 left my account like clockwork every month. One particularly frustrating Thursday, after Mom claimed she couldn't watch Tommy because she might be coming down with something, I called Sarah in desperation. "Of course we'll pick him up," Sarah said without hesitation. "Jim's already heading to the school. He loves their little chats on the drive home. Tommy's been telling him all about their science project." I hung up the phone, fighting back tears. $1,000 a month bought me nothing but excuses from my own mother, while my mother-in-law dropped everything to help without asking for a penny. December crept up on us that year, and the holidays were coming fast. Normally, we spent Christmas at my parents' house. Tradition, you know? The whole family gathered there, exchanging gifts, sharing meals, and making memories. But this year, everything felt different. It started a week before Christmas. I was helping Tommy with his homework when my phone lit up. It was Mom. My stomach dropped before I even answered. "Dakota, honey." She started in that syrupy sweet tone that I knew so well. It always came right before bad news. "We've decided to do something different this year. We're having an adults-only party, no kids allowed." I froze. "What?" It was Christmas Eve. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What?" I finally managed to say, my voice a little shaky. "But it's Christmas. What am I supposed to do with Tommy?" "Oh, that's easy," she said, as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. "You can leave him with Sarah and Jim. They'd love to have him. I'm sure you'll come by around 7 after you drop him off." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Tommy, my sweet, curious, bright boy, wasn't welcome at the family celebration. Not because he was misbehaving, not because he was a problem, just because he asked questions, was interested in how things worked. He wasn't allowed because he didn't fit into the image my parents had of the perfect kid. I sat there staring at the phone, dumbfounded. How could she? This wasn't just about a party. This was about excluding my son from his family, from the love and joy we were supposed to share during the holidays. How could they do this to him? I put the phone down and looked at Tommy, who was sitting at the table, completely unaware of what just happened. He was so focused on his math problems, his little tongue sticking out the way Mark's used to when he was concentrating. I tried to push back the tears that were threatening to spill over. The next week, I debated what to do. The thought of celebrating Christmas without Tommy felt wrong, but skipping the family Christmas entirely seemed too dramatic. So, I came up with a compromise. I'd leave Tommy with Sarah and Jim for a few hours, make a quick appearance at my parents' house to exchange gifts and greetings, and then head back to celebrate properly with my in-laws and son. Christmas Eve finally arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house, alone. The driveway was packed with cars, more than usual for a family gathering. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, the bag of carefully wrapped presents feeling heavier in my hands with every step. The moment I walked through the door, it felt like the air in the room changed. There was laughter, the hum of holiday music, and a sense of cheer that I didn't feel part of. Then it hit me. I could hear the sounds of kids running through the living room, their paper crowns wobbling on their heads. I looked over and saw Rachel's 3 kids in the corner, their faces buried in their phones, as usual. By the Christmas tree, I saw my cousin Linda's children helping themselves to cookies, barely acknowledging anyone around them. More kids appeared in my line of sight, Mark's twins, Susan's teenager, until the room felt too crowded, too loud, too much. I stood in the doorway, frozen, my gift bag hanging limply from my hand as the reality sank in. This wasn't an adults-only party at all. It was a party where only my son wasn't welcome. I felt my heart twist in my chest as I tried to make sense of the situation. Was I overreacting? Did I really expect to bring Tommy into a room full of kids? Was I making this worse in my head? But then, the voices of my relatives asking, "Where's little Tommy? Is he sick? Where's our favorite scientist?" shattered any lingering doubt. Before I could even answer, my cousin Peter chimed in. "Where's our favorite little scientist? Jake's been wanting to show him his new chemistry set." The weight of those questions, the concern in their voices, the absence of my son, was like a knife to my chest. But the real blow came when I spotted my mom in the kitchen, acting as if everything was normal, as if she hadn't just uninvited her only grandson from Christmas. I excused myself, trying to hold back the tears, and made my way to the kitchen. I felt like I was walking through a fog. My head was spinning, my thoughts a blur. I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. "Mom," I said, my voice steady but sharp, "can we talk privately?" She put down the platter of cookies and followed me into the hallway, out of earshot of the others. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You told me this was an adults-only party," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "You specifically told me not to bring Tommy. So why are Rachel's kids here? Why are all the cousins' children here?" Mom straightened up, her eyes avoiding mine. "Well, that's different," she said, as if the answer was simple. "Those children know how to behave at formal gatherings. They're well-mannered." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Well-mannered?" I repeated, incredulous. "Tommy is one of the most polite children I know. His teachers praise his behavior constantly. Sarah and Jim always say he's a joy to be around." My mom rolled her eyes. "Sarah and Jim," she interrupted dismissively. "They spoil him, encourage all those endless questions. The other children deserve to be here more. They know their place." As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the dining room. Rachel's youngest son, Kevin, had grabbed a handful of deviled eggs and was throwing them at his sister, the eggs splattering across her new Christmas dress. I turned back to my mom, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, I can clearly see their superior manners on display," I said, sarcasm dripping from my voice. Mom's face hardened and she waved it off. "That's just children being children. But when Tommy asks questions about how things work, that's unacceptable behavior." I felt my blood boil. She wasn't even trying to justify her actions anymore. She was just making excuses. "Fine," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm leaving. I'm going back to my son." Mom shrugged, barely looking at me. "Fine. Leave if you want to make a scene, but put your gifts under the tree first. We're opening them after dinner." I couldn't take it anymore. Something snapped inside me. Without another word, I walked into the center of the living room, my steps purposeful, and cleared my throat. The sound cut through the holiday music, and conversations died mid-sentence. "Several of you have asked why I came alone tonight," I began, my voice louder than I expected, stronger than I'd ever expected. "Why Tommy isn't here celebrating Christmas with his family." Rachel started to move toward me, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "Let me finish," I said, not backing down. "I'm here alone because a week ago, Mom called and told me this was an adults-only party. I was specifically told not to bring Tommy." I could see the confusion on everyone's faces, but before anyone could speak, I continued. What Aunt's voice cut through the silence. "But all the children are here." The room went quiet, and the tension thickened as I stood there facing everyone. The awkward silence only lasted a moment, but it felt like an eternity. The questions started flying fast and loud from all corners of the room. People were confused, unsure of what was really going on. They were seeing what I had already understood. They were seeing the truth. Uncle Steve was the first to speak up. "But all the children are here," he said, clearly caught off guard. "You said this was an adults-only party. What's going on?" My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Exactly," I said, my gaze sweeping the room. "There wasn't really a ban on children. There was a ban on one child, my son, Tommy." The words hit harder than I anticipated. You could see the realization dawn on some of their faces. They were piecing it together. My parents had made an exception for all the other kids, but when it came to Tommy, he wasn't allowed. Just because he was curious, just because he asked questions, just because he didn't fit the mold of what my parents thought a perfect child should be. Rachel's face flushed red as she tried to speak, but I cut her off. "I'm here alone because apparently my son isn't good enough for this family's Christmas celebration," I continued, my voice growing louder. "But I'm apparently good enough to send $1,000 a month to help support them, while they shut my son out of everything." I felt my chest tighten with a mix of anger and disbelief. My parents and sister had been using me, manipulating me for years, and I had finally woken up to it. I saw the uncomfortable looks on my relatives' faces as they processed what was unfolding. The truth was out in the open now, and they couldn't ignore it anymore. Uncle Mike stepped forward, his voice tinged with confusion. "Wait, what?" he asked, looking at me and then to Rachel. "You've been sending money to your parents every month, Dakota?" The room went completely still as everyone turned their attention to Rachel, who seemed frozen. Her composure had cracked, and I saw panic flood her eyes. She hadn't expected this. "Wait, you've been sending money to our parents?" Jack, her husband, asked, his voice strained with disbelief. "From where? Our account barely covers the bills as it is," Rachel stammered, trying to cover herself, but her words came out in a jumble. "I never actually sent the money," she finally admitted, her voice low. "Mom and Dad asked me to say I was sending $500 a month. They said if you thought I was contributing too, you'd be more likely to help them. I could see the room shift. The realization that my parents had been manipulating not just me, but Rachel as well, was starting to sink in. People were starting to see what had been going on behind the scenes. Aunt Caroline's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "So you scammed your own daughter out of thousands of dollars?" she demanded, her voice incredulous. "You've been using your daughter like an ATM and excluding her kid from the family? That's low, even for you." The room erupted. Everyone was talking over each other, a mix of disbelief, anger, and confusion. People were confronting my parents, demanding explanations. Some expressed disgust at their actions. Others were asking how they could have possibly thought they could get away with it. Rachel was still trying to explain herself to Jack, but her words were getting lost in the noise. I watched it all unfold, my eyes never leaving my parents. The carefully constructed facade they'd put up for years was crumbling around them. They could no longer pretend. It was out in the open now, and there was no turning back. I raised my hand, silencing the room. Everyone quieted down, some out of respect, some because they were finally realizing just how deep the manipulation went. I turned my gaze to my parents, standing in the corner like deer caught in headlights. "I have something else to say," I said, my voice low but firm. "From this moment on, I will no longer be sending you any money, and I will not be maintaining any relationship with you or Rachel. I'm done." The words felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I could see my parents' faces fall, and I knew they understood. They understood that the game was up. There was no more pretending. I turned, walking away without waiting for their response. As I stepped outside and walked to my car, the cold night air hit me like a shock to the system. The finality of my decisions settled over me. I had made the right choice. No more manipulation, no more lies, no more toxic relationships. The sound of the door slamming shut behind me felt like the end of a chapter I should have closed long ago. Sitting in my car, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. With a few taps, I canceled the monthly transfer to my parents. It felt like cutting off a chain I'd been dragging around for months, if not years. It felt like freedom. The drive to Sarah and Jim's house seemed to take both forever and no time at all. When I pulled into their driveway, I could see Tommy through the window, helping Sarah decorate Christmas cookies. The sight of him, happy and loved, brought tears to my eyes. This was what family was supposed to feel like. No manipulation, no lies, just love. We spent the rest of Christmas with Sarah and Jim, decorating cookies, singing carols, and watching Tommy's eyes light up as he helped Jim arrange the nativity scene. It was perfect. It was real. This is what family should feel like. The next morning, while Tommy was still asleep, surrounded by the presents Santa had brought, my phone rang. It was Aunt Caroline. "You might want to hear how things ended last night," she said. No preamble. I braced myself, already knowing that everything had erupted after I left. "After you left, it was like a dam broke," she continued. Uncle Mike stood up and said he couldn't stay in the house another minute. Then Aunt Marie and Uncle Steve followed. Pretty soon, everyone was gathering their coats and kids. They left without even bothering to say goodbye to your parents. Some of them were making very loud comments about the manipulation and the family shame as they walked out. I couldn't help but smile despite everything. "And Jack?" I asked quietly. "Honey," Aunt Caroline replied. "He was livid. He packed up the kids right there and then. Told Rachel he needed time to think about their marriage. He said he was taking the children to his parents' house for Christmas. Rachel was crying, she told me. My parents, of course, tried to do damage control, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it was ugly." "I just want you to know, Dakota," Aunt Caroline said, her voice soft, "we're all on your side. What they did to you and Tommy, it's unforgivable." I sat on my bed, processing everything. My phone started buzzing with text messages. Mom, Dad, and Rachel. All of them said variations of the same thing. "We're sorry, we were wrong. Please talk to us, we can explain." I read each message once and then archived them, refusing to respond. That was the moment I knew. I was done. I didn't need their apologies, their explanations. What I needed was peace. What I needed was to protect my son and give him the love he deserved. The holiday season was quiet and simple, filled with real connections. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly a family. I couldn't go back to what it was, not after everything I'd learned. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a peaceful blur. Tommy and I spent quiet evenings with Sarah and Jim. We played board games, watched holiday movies, and just enjoyed being together. Simple moments, but the kind that truly mattered. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without that heavy weight of tension constantly hanging over me. With Sarah and Jim, there was no drama, no manipulation, just love. It was everything I needed. But the calm wouldn't last forever. On New Year's Eve morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I peeked through the peephole, I saw Mom and Dad standing there, clutching a large, elaborately wrapped package. My stomach flipped. They hadn't reached out since Christmas, and now here they were, trying to force their way back into my life. I hadn't responded to any of their messages, and I had made it clear I wasn't going to. I hesitated for a moment, wondering whether to just ignore them and go about my day, but curiosity gnawed at me. Why now? What did they want? After a long pause, I finally opened the door, but I made sure to stand firmly in the doorway, blocking their entrance. I wasn't ready to let them in, not yet. They stood there, looking smaller somehow, less imposing than they had in the past, like their strength had drained away with the weight of their actions. "We brought this for Tommy," Dad said, holding out the gift. From the wrapping paper, I could see the logo of an expensive electronics store. I didn't move to take it. Tommy didn't need anything from them, not after everything they had done. "He doesn't need it," I replied, keeping my voice steady but cold. "I'm not accepting gifts from you." Mom stepped forward, her face softening. "Please, Dakota," she said, her voice laced with desperation. "We know we were wrong, the way we treated Tommy, the manipulation with the money. We're truly sorry, and we want you to know—" Dad cut in quickly, almost too quickly. "This isn't about the money you were sending us. We really do feel terrible about everything." I studied their faces, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. But something told me it wasn't real. Were they truly sorry? Or were they just sorry because the family was now aware of what they'd done? They'd been caught. Their games were up, and now they wanted to fix things for their own benefit. I didn't trust them anymore. I couldn't. "Are you sorry because you realize what you did was wrong? Or are you sorry because the entire family knows and won't speak to you anymore?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. They exchanged a glance, and in that brief look, I had my answer. They were sorry because they were losing control. They were sorry because they'd been exposed. I shook my head. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "I don't believe you, and I don't trust you. Not anymore." "But we're family," Mom protested, her voice rising with emotion. "We're your parents." I just stared at her, my gaze unwavering. Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't exclude a child from Christmas. Family doesn't scheme and lie to get money. What you did, that's not family. They didn't respond. They didn't know what to say. Their apologies felt empty, their words hollow. Finally, they left, still clutching the gift. Their faces were drawn, their shoulders slumped in defeat, and I stood there, watching them walk away, not with sadness, but with relief. I didn't feel a sense of loss. I didn't feel heartbroken. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I felt like I had done the right thing. And as they disappeared into their car, I closed the door behind me and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It felt like the end of something I had been carrying for far too long. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to fight for a relationship that wasn't real. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my banking app again. With one more click, I canceled the last remaining transfer to my parents. The money, I told myself, was better spent on Tommy's future, his college fund, his dreams. It wasn't for them. It never should have been. The road ahead was clearer now. I no longer had to carry the guilt, the weight of my parents' expectations. I was free to focus on what really mattered, my son, my own future, the people who truly loved me. It wasn't just about cutting ties with my parents. It was about creating space for the relationships that actually meant something. Since the day I stood up to them, I'd noticed a shift. Tommy and I had been welcomed with open arms by Sarah and Jim, of course, but now others in the family had started reaching out too. people who cared about us, who genuinely wanted to be there for us. They saw through my parents' manipulation, and they weren't going to let us slip through the cracks. Aunt Caroline, Uncle Mike, and Aunt Marie, these were the people who showed up when it mattered. They made sure Tommy felt like he was part of the family, and that was everything. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like we had a real support system. The best part of all of this? Watching Tommy thrive. He started calling Sarah and Jim Grandma and Grandpa exclusively now. It felt right. It felt like a new chapter, one where he was surrounded by people who respected him for who he was, not for what they wanted him to be. People who answered his questions, who valued his curiosity. The first time we went over to Aunt Caroline's for a Sunday dinner, Tommy was in his element. He asked about everything. The plants in the garden, the food they were serving, the paintings on the walls, and every time he asked, someone took the time to explain it to him. There were no rolled eyes, no sighs, just genuine interest and care. It was the way family was supposed to feel, and one afternoon at Uncle Mike's house, Tommy had another one of his famous questions. "Mom, why does Uncle Mike's pool have that funny smell?" he asked. Before I could say anything, Uncle Mike was already answering him with a smile. "That's the chlorine, buddy," he said. "It keeps the water clean. It's like magic for the pool." Tommy's eyes lit up, and I could see his mind racing with thoughts, his fingers already moving in 100 directions as he tried to understand. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. This was the family I wanted for Tommy, the family I wanted for myself. One where questions weren't seen as a nuisance, where curiosity wasn't shut down, where love wasn't conditional. As the days turned into weeks, the decision to let go of my parents and the toxic relationship I'd been clinging to felt more and more right. Every time I looked at Tommy, I knew I had made the right choice. Sarah and Jim had become our rocks, our safe harbor in any storm, and with them, I knew we'd be okay. Better than okay. We had each other, and that was enough. Months passed, and things began to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still tough days, moments when the grief of losing Mark would hit me out of nowhere, a reminder of what we'd lost. But the weight of that grief wasn't as suffocating anymore. I had found a new strength within myself, and more importantly, I had found the support I needed. Sarah and Jim continued to be our constant, always there with open arms and hearts. They were the kind of family I had always wished for. No judgment, no expectations, just love. Tommy thrived in their presence. It was amazing to see how his curiosity flourished when he was surrounded by people who encouraged him, who listened when he asked about the world. Every question, no matter how small or silly, was met with an answer, and it felt like he was becoming the best version of himself. Even with everything that had happened with my parents, I still couldn't fully shake the idea that maybe, just maybe, they'd come around, that maybe one day they'd realize the damage they'd done and want to fix things. But I also knew that deep down, I couldn't keep hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. I couldn't keep waiting for them to change when they'd shown me time and time again who they were. One afternoon in late spring, when the air was warm and the trees were thick with fresh leaves, I got a message. It was from Rachel. My heart sank as soon as I saw her name. We hadn't spoken since the Christmas debacle, and part of me had hoped she would just stay out of our lives for good. But I also knew that if there was one thing my sister knew how to do, it was manipulate her way back into the picture when it suited her. I hesitated before opening the message. It was short, to the point. "Dakota, can we talk? I know things have been tough, but I'm sorry. I think we need to have a conversation. Please." The message rattled me. I stared at the screen for a while, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to hold firm to the boundaries I'd set. But another part of me wondered if this was a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or if it was just another way for Rachel to manipulate me, to get me back in line. I took a deep breath and decided to reply. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say, Rachel. You know why things ended up the way they did. You and Mom and Dad crossed a line, and I can't keep letting you do that." I sent it and sat back, waiting for her response. It didn't come right away. For a long while, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then, just as I was about to put my phone down, the message pinged again. I understand. I know I messed up. But I want to make things right. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to try and fix things between us. For Tommy. For family. I read her message again, slowly, letting the words sink in. There was something different in her tone this time. It wasn't the same defensiveness I had come to expect. It wasn't her usual, "I'm sorry," but it was a simple apology, without excuses. For a moment, I thought about what it would mean to truly forgive her, to let go of the resentment, to open the door to reconciliation. But I also knew that just because someone apologized didn't mean they had changed. Trust had been broken, and trust took time to rebuild. I wasn't ready to open that door completely. Not yet, I replied. I'm willing to talk, Rachel, but it's going to take time, and I need to see real change, not just words. There was a long pause before she responded, but when she did, her message was simple and sincere. I understand, I'll be patient. I just want to make things right for real this time. I didn't know what that meant yet, but it was a step forward, a small one, a seed that had been planted. Whether it would grow into something real or just wither and die, I wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was potential for healing, however slow it might be. The days that followed were quiet. Tommy and I kept our routine with Sarah and Jim. We continued to enjoy the simple pleasures in life, baking cookies, going for walks, talking about the stars at night. And I focused on my work, on building a future for Tommy, on the things that mattered. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't completely ignore Rachel's message. It lingered, and I began to wonder what would happen if we could truly rebuild our relationship. If we could ever get past the hurt, the manipulation, and the broken trust. One afternoon, I met Rachel for coffee. It wasn't the big, emotional conversation I had been expecting. It was quiet, civil. She apologized again, and I listened. I wasn't sure what I was looking for in that moment, but I knew it was important. I wanted to see if her actions would match her words, if she was truly sorry, and if she was willing to put in the work to earn my trust back. After we parted ways that day, I wasn't sure what the future held for our relationship. Maybe it would take time, maybe years, for me to fully trust her again. But I knew that for Tommy's sake, I couldn't completely shut her out. I had to be open to the possibility of healing, even if it was just a small chance, for his future, for family. In the meantime, I focused on the family I had already built with Sarah and Jim. I focused on Tommy, on his happiness, his growth, his curiosity. I focused on my own healing and on moving forward. I knew that no matter what happened with Rachel or my parents, I had found a new version of family, one that was built on trust, respect, and love. And for that, I was grateful. Family wasn't always blood. It wasn't always perfect. But sometimes it was about finding the people who accepted you for who you were, who loved you unconditionally, and who stood by your side no matter what. And in that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. As time went on, life settled into a rhythm that felt right, even if it wasn't always easy. Tommy continued to flourish, his inquisitive mind leading him to ask more questions, challenge more ideas, and explore the world around him. He was becoming his own person, and I was so proud of him. Every time I saw him light up over a new discovery, it reminded me of Mark. The way Mark had always been so curious, always so eager to learn. Even though he wasn't here, a piece of him still lived in Tommy, and that was a comfort. But while Tommy's world was growing brighter, mine was still navigating the aftermath of everything that had happened with my parents. I hadn't completely closed the door on them, not yet, but I had made it clear that I was no longer willing to accept the toxic dynamic they had created. Rachel's apology had been a start, but I still wasn't sure what I wanted from her, what I wanted from my family. It was hard to know what forgiveness looked like when so much had been taken from me. Every now and then, I would get a message from Rachel, checking in, asking how Tommy was doing. It was small, a step. But the walls I'd built around myself were still strong, and it wasn't as easy as just letting go. I had to be careful. I couldn't rush into something that had hurt me so deeply. Then one evening, out of nowhere, I received a letter. It was from Mom and Dad. The envelope was plain, with no return address. For a moment, I just stared at it. My stomach turned, and I felt the familiar rush of anxiety flood my chest. Was this another attempt to manipulate me? A way to force their way back into my life? Or was it something different? Something more sincere? I opened the letter with shaking hands. "Dakota," it began, "we've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and we know we can't undo the past. We were wrong. About so many things. About you, about Tommy, about what it means to be a family. And we're sorry. We want to make things right, but we understand if that takes time. If you're willing, we want to start over. But this time, with love and respect, and without any expectations." I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. Was this real? Or was it just another attempt to get something from me? There was no mention of money, no mention of control, just an apology, just an acknowledgement that they had hurt me and that they were willing to make changes. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think. I needed time to process. The weight of everything I had been through wasn't something that could be wiped away in a few lines on paper, but something about this letter felt different. Maybe it was the sincerity that I hadn't seen before. Maybe it was the fact that they weren't trying to rush me or guilt me into anything. They were simply asking for a chance. I showed the letter to Sarah. "What do you think?" I asked her. "Is this real? Can I believe this?" She looked at me with kindness in her eyes, her voice soft but sure. "I can't tell you what to do, Dakota, but I can tell you this. You've already made so much progress. You've built a life for you and Tommy that's full of love and safety. You've found a family that supports you. But if you feel ready to open that door again, do it on your terms. No one should pressure you into anything." Her words stayed with me as I thought about the letter over the next few days. And then, one evening when Tommy was getting ready for bed, I realized something. I was ready to open that door, but I was ready on my terms. Not because I felt obligated, not because I was desperate to fix everything, but because I had healed enough to see that I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. I didn't need to carry it with me. I decided to write them back. "I've read your letter. I've thought about it long and hard. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm willing to start over. I don't know what that will look like yet, and I can't promise everything will be the same. But I believe in healing, and I believe in taking things one step at a time. If you're still willing to meet me where I am, then we can try. But know this, the past doesn't just disappear. It's going to take time for trust to rebuild. It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't a promise. But it was a step, and sometimes that's all we can take. One step at a time." A few weeks later, we met at a park. It wasn't a grand reunion, no emotional speeches, just a quiet meeting. Mom and Dad stood there, waiting for me, looking different somehow. Their faces were softer, less sure, as if they were unsure of how to approach me. I didn't know what to expect, but I walked over, took a deep breath, and sat down with them. We didn't talk about the past right away. We started with small things, how Tommy had been, how life had been for them. But eventually, it came back to what had happened between us, and for the first time in a long time, I heard them say things I didn't expect. "We were wrong," Dad said, his voice quieter than usual. "We should have seen you, seen Tommy. We didn't understand, and we hurt you. We didn't know how to be the parents you needed, and for that, we're sorry." Mom nodded, her eyes wet with tears. "We don't expect things to be the same, but we want to be part of your life, Dakota. We want to try, if you'll let us." And for the first time, I believed them. It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't an immediate healing, but it was a start, a real one, the kind I had been waiting for. We agreed to take things slowly, to rebuild what was broken. We didn't pretend like everything was fine, because it wasn't, but we agreed that if we were going to try again, it had to be with honesty, with vulnerability. I didn't need them to be perfect. I didn't need them to be anything other than real, and so we began again. Over time, the relationship with my parents didn't become what it once was, but it didn't need to. It became something different, something healthier. We learned to appreciate each other for who we were, not for who we thought we should be. Tommy began spending time with them again, slowly, cautiously. It was different, but it was progress, and through it all, I never lost sight of what mattered most. Tommy. The love we had built with Sarah and Jim. The family I had created. One step at a time, one day at a time. The healing that had come from stepping away from the toxicity and finding peace in the people who truly cared. Family wasn't perfect, it wasn't always easy, but when you find the ones who love you, support you, and respect you, that's when you know you've found something real. And I had found that, story 2. We're in Honolulu. Sweetheart, why didn't you visit the airport yesterday? I felt sick to my stomach when I heard my mother's sweet voice on the phone. I stood frozen in the middle of Dallas International Airport. As the realization dawned on me, I kept my packed luggage by my side. They had purposely deceived about our flight date. My name is Jocelyn Adams, and I never believed my own parents would fall this low. After a demanding quarter at work, I was in dire need of a vacation, and I had been looking forward to this family getaway for months. As a marketing executive, I recently finished entertaining key customers from overseas, and this trip was meant to be my reward, a chance to rest and reconnect with my family. What are you saying? Yesterday I managed to say, my voice shaking, you told me the flight was today at 2 p.m. I have the text messages to prove it. The bustling airport suddenly felt suffocating as other travelers rushed past me. Their excitement for their own journey is only highlighting my growing devastation. My mother said, "Oh, sweetie, there must have been some confusion." However, the falsehood was audible in her voice. "It was all right with your sister. We've all made themselves at home at the resort. Of course my sister made it. Amy was always their priority, their child of gold. I should have suspected something was odd when they insisted on arranging all the airline arrangements themselves, stating it would be easier that way. Somehow, the same parents who depended on me to assist them with their expenditures didn't trust me enough to purchase my own ticket. This wasn't a confusion, Mom," I said, my voice growing stronger as anger replaced shock. "You purposefully gave me the wrong date. You never wanted me on this trip, did you?" There was an overwhelming quiet on the other end. Then, "Now, Jocelyn, don't be dramatic. These things do occur." I hung up. My hand is shaking all over me. Families hugged as they planned for their own holidays as I stood alone, betrayed by the people who should have loved me most. I didn't miss the irony. For the last 2 years, I had been providing them with monthly income to assist them sustain their way of life following my dad's early retirement. They opted to keep me out of our family vacation even though they depended on me to pay for everything from food to medical expenses. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at my worthless luggage. More than sadness, though, I was filled with a raging rage. It was more than simply a lost vacation. It involved standing there in the airport and years of favoritism and manipulation. I made a decision that would change everything. I've often questioned if my parents ever actually recognized me as their daughter or merely as their own financial account. It was all about Amy while I was growing up. Her flawless grin, her straight A's, and her dancing performances. Despite learning to live in her shadow, I never gave up on gaining my parents' affection and acceptance. After finishing college, I poured myself into my marketing profession, spending overtime and weekends to climb the corporate ladder, while Amy followed her aspirations of becoming an actor. With the help of our parents' retirement funds, I was actually doing something. Within 5 years, I had earned my position as the youngest executive at my firm, managing major client accounts and a team of 15 people. That's when my dad chose to retire early owing to his arthritis. Their savings had dwindled from supporting Amy's failed acting career, and suddenly they were struggling to make ends meet. Without hesitation, I stepped in to help. Every month I sent them $2,000 to cover their mortgage and utilities when unexpected medical bills came up. I covered those 2 last year alone. I gave them more than $30,000 that I intended to put toward a down payment on a home of my own. We're extremely grateful to have such a generous daughter. On our weekly calls, my mother would say, but those conversations usually ended the same way with updates about Amy's newest audition or her new headshots. They never asked about my work or my life unless they needed something. 2 months ago, when they proposed organizing a family trip to Hawaii, I was excited. Finally, an opportunity to spend quality time together. They insisted on managing all the preparations since Dad had airline miles to utilize. They stated nothing to worry about. Just focus on your important customer meeting. Everything will be taken care of by us. Like an idiot, I believed them. I even deposited extra money to their account to assist cover the resort charges. The least I can do is this. I told them, anticipating relaxing days on the beach and family meals, watching the sunset. I thought maybe this trip would be different, that they would finally see me as more than just their financial safety net. Rather, I found myself standing at a deserted airport, my heart broken and my luggage packed. A fresh message rang on my phone. Amy sent a picture of herself and our parents enjoying cocktails at the beach. The caption read, "The family's vacation has begun. Missing users wish you were there." The wrath that filled me in that instant was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, standing there at the airport gazing at Amy's photo. Something inside me finally snapped. I started scanning through old text exchanges from my parents, and the pattern became clearly evident. Every conversation about the trip had been carefully orchestrated to ensure I'd miss it. The flight's at 2 p.m. on the 15th. My mom had texted. However, I noticed their boarding cards from yesterday when I looked at Amy's Instagram story. The 14th is as visible as day. They hadn't been wrong. They had meticulously prepared this deceit. My phone rang again. It was Jocelyn, my father, this time. He began in a harsh tone, as if I were a child receiving a reprimand. "Your mother is really offended by your attitude. The dates were an honest mistake on our part, and you're making a drama out of this. You have matured as a lady. You should understand. These things do occur. There was no comedy in my laughter. A sincere error. So why was Amy aware of the right date? Why did you insist on making all of the reservations yourself? Why have you spent weeks deceiving me?" "Listen to this now," he said. However, I interrupted him. "No, Dad, you pay attention. I looked at my bank statements just now. I sent you $3,000 for this vacation last week. Was it also a mistake? Or did you simply accept my money with the knowledge that you would abandon me?" I learned everything I needed to know from the stillness that ensued. Finally, taking a new technique, he said, "Jocelyn," in a gentler voice, "you know we're on a fixed income. That money was necessary for the trip. Your career is doing really nicely. You understand about making sacrifices for family, don't you?" I could hardly hold the phone because my hands were trembling so much. "Gives up something for family. I've been making sacrifices for years. My funds and my aspirations to purchase a home have been sacrificed. Everything to assist you and Mom, and you pay me back like this? Don't be selfish." He lost his temper. "Your sister needs this getaway. Because of her acting profession, she has been under a lot of stress." I broke off, raising my voice. "You're referring to the pastime you've been supporting with my money while she lives in your home for free? While I put in 60-hour work weeks to support you all, the auditions never result in anything." "That's sufficient," he yelled. "I will not tolerate this rudeness. You've evolved. Jocelyn, you've become ruthless because of money. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. The hurt was still there, but now it was hardening into resolve." "One thing, Dad, you're correct. Things are going to change much more, and I have changed." After hanging up, I launched my banking app. The bank of Jocelyn needed to be permanently shut down. Anger and resolve filled the trip home from the airport. I documented everything over the evening. Screenshots of text communications, bank transactions, a complete spreadsheet of every dime I'd given them over the last 2 years. I felt terrible after seeing the total, $47,850. That's what my parents' love had cost me. I went to my bank the next morning and closed the joint account I had created in order to send them money. Then I phoned my company's HR department to remove my parents as beneficiaries from my life insurance policy. I felt lighter with every stride, like I was finally escaping unseen bonds. The texts began to pour in at that point. First came the guilt trips from my mother. Knowing that you're angry with us keeps me up at night. Our family is being torn apart by this. How could you have such a cold heart? Amy then joined in. You're being so dramatic, my God. It was merely a miscommunication. You are the reason Mom cries every day. However, my father's speech was the one that truly exposed their true nature. This is not how we brought you up. This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you. This week, your mom needs her prescription filled. You dare not neglect your obligations to this family. Astonished by their boldness, I gazed at my phone. My obligations to the family. What about their responsibility to treat me with basic respect? Instead of reacting, I composed a clear, assertive email. Dear Amy, Dad, and Mom, I've been thinking a lot since yesterday. There was no misunderstanding in the Hawaii event. It was a purposeful choice to exclude me while yet accepting my money. This pattern of conduct stops now. Effective immediately, I am cutting off all financial support. The money I've donated was a choice, not an obligation. You'll need to find another means to cover your bills. Never get in touch with me again for money. I need some distance and time to think about our relationship again. Regards. Within minutes, my phone burst with calls and texts. My mother left tearful voicemails about how they'd lose the house. Amy called me callous and self-centered in her irate messages. My father's texts got increasingly frightening, warning me of consequences if I didn't come to my senses. I blocked them all that evening while I sat alone in my apartment. Doubt attempted to infiltrate. I had learned through years of indoctrination to prioritize their needs, to think that having boundaries made me selfish. But then I recalled being in that airport and knowing that they had spent my money and planned and carried out their betrayal. The next day at work, I got a surprise visitor. My father's sister, my Aunt Rose, entered my office. I heard what occurred, she said, sitting down across from me. I was asked to talk sense into you by your parents. Rose caught me off guard, but I expected more guilt trips. They acted cruelly. Jocelyn, for years I've seen them exploit your generosity. Someone needs to be honest with you. This is not fair to you. As she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, tears filled my eyes. Finally, someone in my family spotted me. Actually noticed me. They'll try everything to pull you back in, Rose cautioned. Remain resilient. You're doing the proper thing. I learned something 2 weeks after I sent that email that made the Hawaii incident seem insignificant. During my lunch break, Rose called. She spoke in a worried tone. I have something to show you, Jocelyn. Can you come to my place after work? She had a pile of papers on her dining room table when I got there. Your father came to me last week asking for a loan. He let slip certain things that didn't add up, so I did some investigation. What she showed me made my blood run cold. Bank records, loan applications, and credit card bills revealed a dismal image. My parents had been spending my money on more than simply necessities. They'd been living much over their means, dependent on my help to finance their expensive lifestyle. Look at this. Rose pointed to a credit card statement. 3 months ago, they obtained a new card under your name. Have you lately looked at your credit report? My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and downloaded my credit report. A $15,000 credit card that I was unaware of was there. They had opened it using my personal information and social security number. That's identity theft, Rose said quietly. That's illegal, Jocelyn. I thought I was out of breath. How could they do this? There's more, Rose went on. Remember that story about Amy's acting career? She's not even in California for auditions. She's been living at home this whole time, working part-time at a local coffee shop. The money, they claimed, was for her headshots and acting courses. They've been using it for gambling. The room spun as pieces fell into place. The continual pleas for more money, the hazy justifications, the guilt trips. When I asked inquiries, it went beyond simple manipulation of emotions. It was fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We need to talk, please, my love. Because of all this tension, your father is experiencing chess difficulties. If anything happens to him, it'll be your fault. I showed Rose the message. She gave a head shake. Additional manipulation. Without your money, their house of cards is collapsing, and they are desperate. What should I do? You have two choices. Rose said you can press charges for the identity theft, or you can deal with this in private. But anyway, you need to defend yourself. I thought of years of sacrifice, of putting their needs before mine, of trusting their falsehoods, the chest pains, the tears, the guilt trips. They were playing a game. I want to talk to them one last time, I said face to face, but you must accompany me there. Rose nodded. I'll set it up. But first, we need to gather evidence and freeze your credit. They have revealed their true selves to you. Jocelyn, have faith in them. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't stop thinking about all the dreams I had postponed in order to provide for them. The savings I should have had, the trips I never took, the house I wanted to buy. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd robbed years of my life. But as I lay there, something else occurred to me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly clear-headed. The mist of deceit was dissipating, and in its place was a steel-like resolve. They desired to engage in gaming. All right, but this time I would be the one writing the rules. The confrontation was set for Saturday afternoon at Rose's house. I spent the morning with a lawyer understanding my options regarding the identity theft. Then I prepared a folder with all the evidence, everything, including text messages, bank transactions, and credit card bills. I needed them to understand that their game was over. Amy was with my parents when they got there. She looked nothing like the carefree girl in those Hawaii photos. She had a drawn face. Guilty. They filed into Rose's living room like students called to the principal's office. I appreciate you coming. I began my voice study. I've found a few things we should talk about. Jocelyn, my mother interrupted. Tears already started. You have to know before you speak. No? I interrupted her. Now I'm speaking. I took out the statements from my credit cards. Is there anyone who could explain this? The hue vanished from my dad's face. Amy looked perplexed, but my mother jumped in fast. It was an emergency. We intended to inform you of an emergency. I laid out additional documents such as the credit card maxes and gambling debts. Or perhaps Amy's fictitious acting career. Amy's head jerked upward. Fake? What do you mean? I looked over at her. Do you truly have no idea? They've been telling me you're in California pursuing acting. That's where all my money supposedly went. Your headshots, classes, rent. What? Amy glanced at our parents in disbelief. I've been working at Starbucks. They informed me you declined to aid with my college expenses. The room erupted in chaos. Amy broke down in tears. My mom made an effort to clarify, and my father stood up, his face red with anger. Enough, he yelled. We did what we had to do. You don't comprehend. Oh, I get it exactly, I said, pulling out my final piece of evidence. You stole someone else's identity. That's a federal crime. I have two choices here. File charges or deal with this in private. Your decision. My mother sank into histrionic sobbing. You wouldn't wear your parents. Children are not stolen from by their parents, Rose interjected. Parents don't lie and manipulate and commit fraud. Just then, my father gripped his chest and staggered my heart. He gasped, "Call an ambulance." For a second, I almost fell for it. But then I saw my mother's face. Calculation, not panic. This was their final play, their attempt to regain control? No, I answered firmly. No more deceit. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a repayment agreement for every penny you stole. You're going to close that fraudulent credit card, and you're going to leave me alone. What if we say no? My dad inquired, his heart attack mysteriously forgotten. After I file charges, you can tell a judge what you did. The ensuing hush was deafening. At last, my father gave a defeated nod. My mother stared at the floor, her tears suddenly dry, and Amy looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. As they signed the reimbursement agreement my lawyer had drafted, I only experienced a profound, hollow sadness for the family. I was not satisfied. I believed I had. In the weeks that followed, my parents' carefully constructed facade crumbled completely without my financial support. They were forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment. According to the payback arrangement, they had to return me for the majority of their retirement income. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Amy moved in with Rose temporarily while she planned out her future moves. She called me one evening, her voice small and uncertain. She said, "I didn't know what they were doing." "They have been pitting us against one another for years. I'm so sorry, Jocelyn." Her apology meant something, but it couldn't erase years of damage. Still, it was a start. My parents made one more attempt to influence me. They showed up at my office unannounced, causing a scene in the lobby. "We'll lose everything," my mom cried, "after all we've sacrificed for you." I stood my ground, surrounded by concerned colleagues. "You lost me." Calmly, I said, "That's the only thing that matters. And that was your choice." Security escorted them out, and I was filled with calm as I watched them go. I was free of the guilt that had plagued me for years. I was no longer their ATM, their emotional punching bag, or their victim. That evening, I scheduled a trip to Hawaii just for me. As I confirmed the reservation, I smiled at the irony. They had tried to exclude me from a family vacation, but in doing so, they had given me something priceless: liberty. I saw the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks when standing on a beach in Maui 3 months later. This wasn't the family vacation I'd originally imagined, but it was exactly what I needed. My phone quiet without the daily assault of guilt-tripping texts, buzzed with a text from Rose. "They're finally moving out of the house this weekend," she wrote. "Amy's enrolled in community college. She's asking about having coffee with you when you're back." I took a long intake of salt air and answered, "Tell her I'm open to it." Slowly but gradually, the repayment plan was taking shape. My parents had sold most of their assets, and every month a check arrived from them without fail. Not because they were sorry, but because they had no choice. If they failed to make even one payment, the fraud charges I had suppressed would come to light. My mother continued to attempt using several accounts to write heartfelt emails. "While you live in luxury, we eat ramen noodles. Was this what you were hoping for?" Without replying, I erased them. I was no longer swayed by their guilt trips. At work, I'd gotten another promotion. The energy I used to spend managing my parents' chaos now went into building my own life. I had even begun to look at homes. I'd put off my desire for years in order to support their way of life. I finally got it while I stood on the beach. Sometimes the happiest endings don't require forgiveness or reconciliation. There are moments when it's about deciding to walk away. I was set free by my parents, who had orchestrated this Hawaii trip to harm me. Story 3. "Don't you dare bring that up right now," Josh yelled at me during breakfast, his palm clenching over his coffee mug. "I simply think we should wait a few more years before trying for a kid." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I fought back tears as I glanced at my untouched plate. "My name is Julie, and I'm 33 years old. I work as an elementary school teacher in Austin, Texas. For the past 2 years, I've been living what I believed was just an unlucky battle to conceive, but I recently realized it was all a deception. I'd been meticulously following my period, adjusting my food, and going to every reproductive doctor in the city. Each negative pregnancy test seemed like another failure, and I hated myself fully. Was I overly stressed? Was I consuming the wrong foods? Was there anything fundamentally wrong with me? Josh would hold me as I wept, caressing my hair and promising me it would happen when the moment was perfect. That morning's debate over children wasn't our first, but something in Josh's reaction felt different. He'd been growing more defensive recently, and I couldn't understand why. I chose to clean up the mess in our attic since I was still irritated over our argument. He was at work that afternoon. In order to control my anxiousness, the doctor had advised me to keep occupied, and I was in dire need of the diversion. I discovered it while searching through old crates. A manila folder labeled 2022 tax docs was crammed into a dusty storage container. I nearly put it down, but then I saw Josh's name. My hand began to shake as I took the document out. The letterhead, dated March 15, 2022, exactly 8 months before our wedding, came from Austin Medical Center. This document attests to the successful completion of your vasectomy treatment. After 2 years of pain, remorse, and self-blame, the paper crumpled in my trembling hands and changed completely. Josh knew it was impossible during every doctor's visit, every test that came back negative, and every night when he cried. He had kept his secret while he watched me physically and emotionally destroy myself. I had never experienced wrath like the one that filled me. It was more than fury. It was cold-blooded rage. I replaced the paper just where I had found it after gently smoothing it out. After that, I walked downstairs, brewed a cup of tea, and began to strategize. Josh had no clue what was going to happen, but he was going to find out just how much his deceit would cost him. My thoughts were racing as I sat at our kitchen table and stared into my tea. My spouse was changing from the person I thought I knew to someone I didn't recognize. He had seen me sob myself to sleep how many times? How many times had he held my hand during yet another unsatisfactory visit to the doctor, knowing full well that he was the cause of our infertility? Josh texted me this morning about it, and my phone buzzed. I apologize. I lost my temper. When I go home, let's speak. I adore you. As I read his message, my hands began to shake. He was continuing the deed even now. I reflected on the money we had spent on reproductive procedures that he knew would never be successful. The experts, the supplements, the never-ending experiments. To cope with what I believed to be my infertility, I had even begun going to a therapist. I discovered a picture from 6 months ago while looking through the camera roll on my phone. Josh and I during the baby shower for my sister Rachel. Josh reassured me when I broke down in the loo that day, saying, "Our time will come, honey. All we have to do is wait." It made me physically ill to think of it. I started calculating the costs of specialists, fertility treatments, and medical expenses after opening my banking app. In the last 2 years, we have spent more than $15,000, which might have been used for travel, a down payment on a home, or anything else. It had been squandered on a falsehood instead. However, it would be a mistake to confront him right now. Josh was shrewd. For years, he had tricked me into thinking I was the issue. He would figure out a way to turn things around if I extended my hand too soon. Perhaps even cause me to question what I had discovered. No, I had to be more intelligent than that. I required a strategy. I took out my laptop and began looking up divorce attorneys. Then I thought of my flatmate from college, Sarah, who was now a financial advisor. Last year, she had assisted a friend who was going through a difficult divorce. I remembered to give her a call tomorrow. There was more to Josh's treachery than the lies and the vasectomy. It was about the years that they played the part of the encouraging spouse while seeing me struggle and allowing me to place the responsibility on myself. He had betrayed my confidence, my money, and my time. Above all, though, he had stolen my decision over my own destiny. Well, I was reversing that decision immediately. Around 6, I heard Josh's vehicle pull into the driveway. I inhaled deeply and practiced my poise one final time. I had already made sure that everything in the attic was exactly how it had been, and had stored away any trace of my afternoon discovery. I had prepared his favorite dish, cannelloni, and the house smelt of it. But suddenly I felt sick at the idea of preparing food for him. As soon as he entered, he said, "Something smells amazing." Taking out the briefcase, he approached me from behind and attempted to plant a kiss on my cheek, but I moved aside, feigning a need for something from the cupboard. "About this morning?" he began in a soft voice. "I am aware of your frustration. Perhaps we should investigate more natural methods of conception. I've read about this holistic physician. The ridiculousness of this nearly made me chuckle. He was recommending yet another ineffective therapy, fully aware of the reasons why it would fail. I feigned a smile instead. "Perhaps you're correct to wait," I remarked, closely observing his response. "Maybe we should stop trying." I saw the little flicker of relief that crossed his features. That would benefit us, in my opinion. As he reached for my hand, he spoke. "You've been under a lot of stress recently. Feeling anxious?" "Correct. For that was the issue. Not his vasectomy in secret. I let him take the lead over dinner, nodding occasionally as he discussed his day at the real estate agency. While he was at work, I had called Sarah, and it was all I could think about. She suggested that I begin compiling financial records and provided me with the name of a top-notch divorce lawyer. I was pondering. As I pushed my food gently about my plate, I remarked, "Perhaps I ought to hunt for a teaching job that pays more. For when we do start a family, you know." Josh gave a reassuring grin. "Honey, that's a really good idea. You're an amazing educator. You would be an asset to any school." My blood boiled at the ease with which he played along. I'd have to start recording his lies, too. According to Sarah, everything could be helpful during the divorce process. Tomorrow, I might visit the bank. "Check out our savings options," I added. "I'm capable of managing the money." He spoke hastily. "Too soon. That is not a concern for you." However, Sarah informed me that Josh had been transferring funds between accounts for months, so I did have grounds for concern. Little sums, nothing really noticeable, but it mounted up. I learnt his secret. Had he been getting ready for the day? Or was this just one more way he was lying? Something hardened inside of me as I watched him eat his cannelloni while talking about his weekend plans. He believed he was in charge of everything. He believed he could control me indefinitely. He was unaware of what was about to happen. I phoned in ill for work the following morning. I drove to see the divorce lawyer, Patricia Walker, as soon as Josh left for work. Sarah had suggested. I felt underdressed because her office was in one of those slick high-rises in downtown Austin, simply moving through the lobby. Patricia motioned for me to sit while her friend Sarah gave me the rundown. She had keen eyes and an even sharper blazer, and she was perhaps in her 50s, but you have to tell me everything. As I recapped the previous 2 years, I took out the manila folder that I had taken pictures of in the attic. Sarah had observed the money irregularities, the deceit, and the fertility procedures. Patricia made thorough notes. When I brought up the dates, I noticed her jaw tighten, but otherwise her demeanor stayed neutral. She said that he had a vasectomy before to your wedding, but never revealed it. I gave a nod, refusing to cry. Knowing that it's more than simply deceit, he watched me endure all those procedures. Patricia cut in, her tone stern. "He let you spend a lot of money on treatments that he knew wouldn't work. The argument for financial fraud is compelling." Taking up a legal pad, she began writing. "We must first protect your funds. Switch banks and open a new account. He's never used one. Begin transferring little sums of money. Not anything that would cause concern. What about the documentation for the vasectomy?" "Should I take it?" I inquired. Patricia gave a headshake. "Nothing should be taken out of the house just yet. We will directly subpoena such medical center records. More importantly, we must record any new falsehoods. We benefit from the fact that Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings." I was taking notes with trembling hands. It all seemed unreal, as if I were organizing a military operation rather than ending my marriage. Patricia said, her face softening a little. "One more thing. Do not yet face him. Your spouse is one of those men. They are skilled manipulators. You know, he'll start hiding his tracks if he finds out." I walked out of Patricia's office, feeling oddly at ease and with a thorough action plan. I went to the bank first, where I applied for a credit card in my own name and started a new account. After that, I went to my doctor's office to obtain copies of all the paperwork pertaining to my reproductive treatments. Evidence that we had spent thousands on procedures. Josh was aware that they were useless. Josh texted me as soon as I got home. "I'd heard you were ill. Do you want me to stop over for some soup on my way home?" As I read his letter, I reflected on all the times he had acted like the protective husband and the morning sickness treatments he had purchased for me when I was worried I could be expecting. The shoulder to weep on after all the tests came back negative, and the foot massages after dismal doctor's appointments. That would be pleasant. As a precaution, I included a heart emoji in my reply text. This imaginary game might be played by 2 people. For the remainder of the afternoon, I photographed everything that may be significant as I went through our files: bank records, tax returns, accounting for investments. I discovered a drawer filled with real estate records. I had never heard of any properties. Other than keeping his vasectomy secret, Josh had been quite busy. Simply wait. I replaced each file gently, whispering to myself, simply wait. The week after that was a self-control exercise. As if nothing had changed, I would bid Josh farewell with a kiss every morning. I would listen to his stories about his job every night, smiling and nodding as I surreptitiously recorded everything. My phone's speech recording app became my daily buddy. More than only Josh's little financial transactions were discovered during Sarah's probe into our accounts. The year before our wedding, 2 investment properties that I was unaware of were purchased. I didn't have access to the account that provided the down payment. Patricia filed for further financial discovery as soon as I told her about it. During our follow-up discussion, she mentioned that your spouse had been preparing this for some time. The vasectomy, these characteristics, and the distinct stories. There is a pattern of intentional dishonesty. The biggest surprise, though, was when my fertility doctor, Dr. Martinez, called. I had requested that her staff forward my whole medical history, but Mrs. Anderson, there was a problem. While looking over your information, I detected something odd. Her voice said, "Be cautious. Your spouse repeatedly contacted our office to ask that some treatments be postponed. He said that you required additional time since you were experiencing anxiety related to the treatments." My hand gripped the phone more tightly. What is he? He expressly requested that we reschedule your sessions for hormone treatment. Said you weren't prepared emotionally. She hesitated, considering what we currently know. I thought you ought to know. I thanked her, hung up, and threw up just as I was about to enter the restroom. Josh hadn't stood by and let me suffer. He had deliberately obstructed my medical care. He was responsible for all of the postponed appointments that I had attributed to the clinic's hectic schedule. Josh brought takeaway from my favorite Thai restaurant home that evening. As he prepared dinner, he remarked, "I thought you could use a treat. Lately, you've appeared a little down." Thinking of Dr. Martinez's epiphany, I made myself grin. As I saw him serve the dinner, I said, "Just tired from work." To be honest, I've been considering taking a vacation from teaching, perhaps investigate other options. He jerked his head up. "What opportunities?" "I'm not sure yet. Something distinct." I shrugged, observing the tension in his shoulders. "Real estate, perhaps? It always sounds so fascinating to you." "Your passion is teaching," he remarked hastily. "Additionally, stability will be crucial when we have a family." He stated that casually when we first started a family, and it infuriated me. However, I spoke in a light tone. "Most likely you're correct. It was only an idea." I sneaked out of bed to check Josh's phone after he had fallen asleep. I needed to know, even though Patricia had cautioned me against doing anything that would jeopardize our case. I saw many discussions with a number I didn't recognize in his recent calls. After noting it down, I gently put his phone back in place. Sarah checked the number with her contacts as a financial investigator the following day. It belongs to a Houston divorce lawyer. Josh was preparing his own escape strategy because he had phoned them 6 times in the previous month. All right, 2 may get ready for battle. The next insight came from a surprising place. Maria, the barista who had worked there during my infertility issues, drew me aside while I was getting coffee at our regular location. She looked around anxiously and added, "I've been wanting to tell you something. Sometimes your husband brings a girlfriend with him." My heart faltered, but I assumed it could have anything to do with work. However, what? I heard them discussing divorce attorneys and real estate ventures last week. "Make sure you don't find out about certain accounts before everything is in place," she said. Maria put her hand on my arm. "After witnessing you endure so much, I thanked her and sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel, even though I know it's not my place." Sarah had noted that some of the property paperwork had a woman's name on them. Another real estate agent in Josh's company is Rebecca Wilson. Everything made obvious now. I had another meeting with Patricia that afternoon. "We must accelerate," I remarked, displaying the notes I had collected to her. He and his coworker had something planned. Patricia looked over the information and nodded. "In fact, this is to our advantage. Enough proof of financial malfeasance has been obtained for us to request emergency orders. The accounts he has been concealing can be frozen. What about the evidence for vasectomy? 8 months prior to your wedding, the medical center confirmed the date of the surgery. As you found out. She bent over. Julie, we have him on several fronts: marital dishonesty, medical manipulation, and money fraud. The issue is, what is your preferred course of action? I inhaled deeply. He should feel as powerless as I felt. I want him to know how it feels to have everything taken away from him. Then let's carefully plan this. It's the element of surprise that matters. Josh was working late that night once more, most likely with Rebecca. I make use of the time to finish my escape strategy. I had previously paid cash to a friend of Sarah's to get a tiny flat. I had records of every lie he had said over the previous 2 years, as well as copies of all the crucial papers. Josh paid close attention the following morning as he prepared breakfast and inquired about my plans for the day. Actually, I answered, trying to look as innocent as possible, you suggested several natural fertility therapies, and I was considering researching them. You might be able to accompany me to the consultation. His face flashed with a terror that was almost ridiculous. Oh, honey, this new development project has me quite busy at work right now. Rebecca Wilson's. As I observed him freeze, I asked nonchalantly, You've been working on it for a long time. Carefully, he stated, It's a complicated deal. Many moving components. There probably were. I listened to his steady breathing as I lay awake next to him that night. All the components would be in place by tomorrow. Patricia had the court documents prepared. Every suspicious transaction and secret account had been recorded by Sarah. Dr. Martinez had even given a thorough statement on Josh's meddling in my medical care. He will soon know what it was like to have your entire universe revealed to be a lie. I decided to have the encounter on a Sunday morning. Josh was checking his phone while sipping coffee at our kitchen table, totally oblivious to the fact that his meticulously built world was about to collapse. Hi there. I discovered something fascinating in the attic. Putting the paperwork for the vasectomy on the table, I said, Do you want to explain? He lost the color in his face. His hands were shaking as he reached for the paperwork, his coffee cup clattering on the saucer. I can explain, Julie. Describe what? How, 8 months before to our wedding, you underwent a vasectomy. Or how, knowing that I couldn't conceive physically, you watched me spend 2 years blaming myself. He got to his feet, disbelief giving way to desperation. When I interrupted him, I was about to inform you. How many more fertility procedures will I need to undergo, and how many more nights will I have to watch myself sob myself to sleep? My voice remained calm despite my anger. Or did you hold off until you and Rebecca had decided on an escape plan? Rebecca's name caused his head to snap up. How did you? Josh, I know everything. The calls to the Houston divorce lawyer while you were playing your games, the secret accounts, the hidden properties. I had a case to make. A case? His voice broke. Check your email. From now on, the communication can be handled by our lawyers. I started to walk away, then stopped. And the accounts you have been concealing, too. They're frozen. I wish you luck when you explain those to the judge. I started for the door, and Josh scurried after me. His poise was utterly destroyed. I can't be subjected to this. Actually, those accounts and properties belong to me. I turned to face him. You unlawfully concealed their marital assets in violation of Texas marriage statutes. Patricia says that will be of great interest to the judge, in addition to the proof of your medical fraud. Anger twisted at his face. My confidential medical records were seen by you. You contacted Dr. Martinez's office to postpone my fertility treatments, which was such a hypocritical claim that I nearly burst out laughing. Or how you have been preparing your own divorce plan with Rebecca. That's not the same? I interrupted him before he could finish. You're correct. It is different. Because while you were breaking my trust and watching me suffer, I was gathering proof. Every falsehood, every covert story, every deceptive practice, everything is recorded. His phone started vibrating from his look. I was aware that the legal notices on the frozen accounts were reaching him. His face paled as he gazed at the television. I had faith in you. Silently, I said, I cherished you and you. Even though I knew the truth the entire time, let me believe that something was wrong with me. Please, Julie, we can resolve this. His voice breaking, he pleaded, "I'll tell you everything." I went behind the door and grabbed my already packed luggage. "You can tell the judge about it. They'll want to know why you saw your wife have a covert vasectomy and then go through reproductive treatments for 2 years. He fell into a chair as I was leaving, his world collapsing like mine had in that attic.